The Art of Fermentation, an in-depth exploration of essential concepts and processes from around the world. By Sandor Ellix Katz. Narrated by Crisden. Copyright 2012 by Sandor Ellix Katz. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Sandor Ellix Katz and Georges Borchardt Incorporated, and was produced in the year 2013 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Forward. The Art of Fermentation is an inspiring book, and I mean that literally. The book has inspired me to do things I've never done before, and probably never would have done if I hadn't read it. In fact, Katz's book is the main reason that my kitchen counters and basement floor have lately sprouted an assortment of mason jars, ceramic crocks, jelly jars, bottles, and carboys, the clear ones glowing with unearthly colors. Since falling under the spell of Katz's fermentation evangelism, I have launched big crocks of sauerkraut and kimchi, mason jars of pickled cucumbers, carrots, beets, cauliflower, onions, peppers, and ramps, jelly jars of yogurt and kefir, and 5-gallon carboys of beer and mead. All of them, I am regularly reminded, are alive. When it's late at night and quiet in the house, I can hear my ferments gurgling contentedly. It's become a deeply pleasing sound because it means my microbes are happy. I read cookbooks all the time and never make a thing from them, so why was the Art of Fermentation different? For one thing, Sandor Katz writes about the transformative power of fermentation with such infectious enthusiasm that he makes you want to try things just to see what happens. It's the same way I felt the day my elementary school teacher told us something miraculous would happen if we mixed up some vinegar with baking soda. These microbial transformations are miraculous, and so, very often, are the results. Striking new flavors and interesting new textures wrought from the most ordinary ingredients, and not by us, but by bacteria and fungi. Another reason Katz inspires us to try recipes to make things you never even knew existed, kvass, shrub, is that he never intimidates. To the contrary. As a cookbook, and as I will get to, it is so much more than a cookbook, The Art of Fermentation is empowering. Though the book traffics in many kinds of microbial mystery, Katz is by temperament a demystifier. It's not that complicated, he assures us. Anyone can make sauerkraut. Here's all you need to do. And if something goes wrong, if your kraut grows an alarming-looking beard of mold, no need to panic. Just shave off the mold and enjoy the kraut beneath it. But this attitude has something more behind it than Sandor Katz's easygoing temperament in the kitchen. There is a politics at work here as well. The Art of Fermentation is much more than a cookbook. Or rather, it is a cookbook in the same way that Zen and the Art of Archery is a how-to about bows and arrows. Sure, it tells you how to do it, but much more important, it tells you what it means, and why an act as quotidian and practical as making your own sauerkraut represents nothing less than a way of engaging with the world. Or rather, with several different worlds, each nested inside the other. The invisible world of fungi and bacteria, the community in which you live, and the industrial food system that is undermining the health of our bodies and the land. This might seem like a large claim for a crock of sauerkraut, but Sandor Katz's signal achievement in this audiobook is to convince you of its truth. To ferment your own food is to lodge an eloquent protest of the senses against the homogenization of flavors and food experiences now rolling like a great undifferentiated lawn across the globe. It is also a declaration of independence from an economy that would much prefer we were all passive consumers of its commodities, rather than creators of unique products expressive of ourselves and the places where we live. Because your sauerkraut or homebrew will be nothing like mine or anyone else's. The Koreans, who know a thing or two about fermentation, distinguish between the tongue taste of various foods and the hand taste. Tongue taste is a simple matter of molecules making contact with taste buds, the kind of cheap and easy flavors any food scientist or food corporation can produce. Hand taste is the far more complex experience of a food that bears the indelible mark, the care, and sometimes even the love of the person who made it. The sauerkraut you make yourself will have hand taste. And you will have plenty of it to give away, trust me. One of the best things about making your own ferments is sharing them with others, off the grid of the cash economy. I now swap bottles of beer and mead with other home brewers and take part in a steady trade in mason jars, which leave my house brimming with sauerkraut only to return brimming with other people's kimchi or pickles. To delve into the world of fermented foods is to enter the community of fermentos, who happen to be a most interesting, eccentric, and generous bunch. But of course, there is another community to which the art of fermentation serves as a kind of passport or visa, the unseen community of fungi and bacteria all around us and within us. If this book has an underlying agenda, and it assuredly does, it is to help us reconceive our relationship with what biologist Lynn Margulis calls the microcosmos. Since Louis Pasteur discovered the role of microbes in disease more than a century ago, most of us have found ourselves on a war footing with respect to bacteria. We dose our children with antibiotics, keep them as far away from microbes as possible, and generally strive to sanitize their world. We are living in the age of Purell. And yet biologists have come to appreciate that the war on bacteria is not only futile, the bacteria, which can out-evolve us, will always win, but counterproductive. The profligate use of antibiotics has produced resistant bacteria as lethal as any we managed to kill. Those drugs, along with a processed food diet lacking in both bacteria and food for bacteria, aka fiber, have disordered the microbial ecology in our gut in profound ways that we are just beginning to understand, and which may well explain many of our health problems. Children protected from bacteria turn out to have higher rates of allergy and asthma. We are discovering that one of the keys to our well-being is the well-being of the microflora with whom we share these bodies, and with whom we co-evolved. And it looks like they really, really like sauerkraut. In the war on bacteria, Sandor Katz is a confirmed pacifist. But he isn't just sitting out the war or speechifying about it. He's doing something to end it. A post-Pasteurian, Katz would have us renegotiate the terms of our relationship with the microcosmos, and The Art of Fermentation is an eloquent and practical manifesto showing us exactly how to do that, one crock of sauerkraut at a time. I fully expect that, like a particularly vibrant microbial culture, this audiobook will spawn thousands of new fermentos, and not a moment too soon. Welcome to the party. Michael Pollan, December 22nd, 2011. Introduction. Little could I have imagined, as a New York City kid who loved pickles, that those delicious, crunchy, garlicky, sour pickles would lead me on such an extraordinary journey of discovery and exploration. In fact, products of fermentation, not only pickles, but also bread, cheese, yogurt, sour cream, salami, vinegar, soy sauce, chocolate, and coffee, as well as beer and wine, were prominent in my family's diet, as they are in many, if not most people's, though we never talked about them as such. Yet, as my path through life led me to various nutritional ideas and dietary experiments, I did learn about the digestive benefits of bacteria present in living fermented foods and began to experience their restorative powers. And when I found myself with a garden, faced with a surplus of cabbages and radishes, sauerkraut beckoned me. Our love affair indoors. The first time I taught a sauerkraut-making workshop at the Sequatchie Valley Institute in 1999, I learned that there is a tremendous fear in our culture of aging food outside of refrigeration. In our time, most people are raised to view bacteria as dangerous enemies and refrigeration as a household necessity. The idea of leaving food outside of refrigeration in order to encourage bacterial growth triggers fears of danger, disease, and even death. How will I know whether the right bacteria are growing is a common question. People largely assume that for microbial transformations to be safe, they require extensive knowledge and control and are therefore a specialized domain best left to experts. Most food and beverage fermentation processes are ancient rituals that humans have been performing since before the dawn of history. Yet we have largely relegated them to factory production. Fermentation has mostly disappeared from our households and communities. Techniques evolved by disparate human cultures over millennia through observation of natural phenomena and manipulating conditions with trial and error have become obscure and are in danger of being lost. I have spent nearly 2 decades exploring the realm of fermentation. I do not have a background in microbiology or food science. I am just a food-loving, back-to-the-land generalist who became obsessed with fermentation, spurred by a voracious appetite, a practical desire for food not to go to waste, and a willful desire to maintain good health. I have experimented widely, talked to many people about the subject, and done a lot of reading on it. The more I experiment and the more I learn, the more I realize how little of an expert I remain. People grow up in households in which some of these traditional ferments are the daily context, and their knowledge is far more intimate. Others become commercial manufacturers and develop technical mastery in order to produce and market consistent and profitable products. Countless such people know much more than I about brewing beer, making cheese, baking bread, curing salamis, or brewing sake. Microbiologists or other scientists who study very specific facets of the genetics, metabolism, kinetics, community dynamics, or other mechanisms of fermentations understand it all in terms I can only barely comprehend. Nor do I possess anything approaching encyclopedic knowledge of fermentation. The infinite variation that exists in how people on every continent ferment all the various foods they eat is too vast for any individual to have comprehensive knowledge. However, I have had the privilege to hear a lot of wonderful stories and taste many homemade and artisan fermented concoctions. Many readers of my books, visitors to my website, and participants in my workshops have recounted tales of their grandparents' fermentation practices. Immigrants have excitedly told me about ferments from the old country, often lost to them through migration. Travelers have reported on ferments they have encountered. People have divulged their quirky family variations. And other experimentalists, such as myself, have shared their adventures. I also have fielded thousands of troubleshooting questions, causing me to research and think about many more aspects of the inevitable variations that occur in home fermentations. This book is a compendium of the fermentation wisdom I have collected. I have included many other people's voices throughout. Though I have made an attempt to be thorough, this book is far from encyclopedic. My intention with it is to identify patterns and convey concepts to empower you with tools so you can explore and reclaim fermentation into your life. I am on a mission of sharing skills, resources, and information related to this important art, in the hope that these long-standing co-evolutionary relationships, embedded in cultural practices, are not lost, but rather spread, cross-pollinated, and adapted. One word that repeatedly comes to the fore in my exploration and thinking about fermentation is culture. Fermentation relates to culture in many different ways, corresponding with the many layers of meaning embedded in this important word, from its literal and specific meanings in the context of microbiology to its broadest connotations. We call the starters that we add to milk to make yogurt or to initiate any fermentation cultures. Simultaneously, culture constitutes the totality of all that humans seek to pass from generation to generation, including language, music, art, literature, scientific knowledge, and belief systems, as well as agriculture and culinary techniques, in both of which fermentation occupies a central role. In fact, the word culture comes from the Latin cultura, a form of colere, to cultivate. Our cultivation of the land and its creatures, plants, animals, fungi, and bacteria, is essential to culture. Reclaiming our food and our participation in cultivation is a means of cultural revival, taking action to break out of the confining and infantilizing dependency of the role of consumer, user, and taking back our dignity and power by becoming producers and creators. This is not just about fermentation, even if, as a biological force upon our food, that is inevitable, but about food more broadly. Every living creature on this earth interacts intimately with its environment via its food. Humans in our developed technological society, however, have largely severed this connection, and with disastrous results. Though affluent people have more food choices than people of the past could ever have dreamed of, and though one person's labor can produce more food today than ever before, the large-scale commercial methods and systems that enable these phenomena are destroying our earth, destroying our health, and depriving us of dignity. With respect to food, the vast majority of people are completely dependent for survival upon a fragile global infrastructure of monocultures, synthetic chemicals, biotechnology, and transportation. Moving toward a more harmonious way of life and greater resilience requires our active participation. This means finding ways to become more aware of and connected to the other forms of life that are around us and that constitute our food, plants and animals, as well as bacteria and fungi, and to the resources such as water, fuel, materials, tools, and transportation upon which we depend. It means taking responsibility for our shit, both literally and figuratively. We can become creators of a better world, of better and more sustainable food choices, of greater awareness of resources, and of community based upon sharing. For culture to be strong and resilient, it must be a creative realm in which skills, information, and values are engaged and transmitted. Culture cannot thrive as a consumer paradise or a spectator sport. Daily life offers constant opportunities for participatory action. Seize them. Just as the microbial cultures exist only as communities, so too do our broader human cultures. Food is the greatest community builder there is. It invites people to sit and stay a while, and families to gather together. It welcomes new neighbors and weary travelers and beloved old friends. And it takes a village to produce food. Many hands make light work, and food production often gives rise to specialization and exchange. And even more than food in general, fermented foods, especially beverages, play a significant role in community building. Not only are many feasts, rituals, and celebrations organized around products of fermentation, such as bread and wine, ferments are also among the oldest and most important of the foods that add both value and stability to the raw products of agriculture, essential to the economic underpinnings of all communities. The brewer and the baker are central participants in any grain-based economy, and wine transforms perishable grapes into a stable and coveted commodity, as does cheese for milk. Reclaiming our food means reclaiming community, engaging its economic interconnectivity of specialization and divisions of labor, but at a human scale, promoting awareness of resources and local exchange. Transporting goods around the globe takes a huge amount of resources and wreaks environmental havoc. And while exotic foods can be thrilling treats, it's inappropriate and destructive to organize our lives primarily around them. Most globalized food commodities are grown in vast monocultures, at the expense of forests and diverse subsistence crops. And by being totally dependent on an infrastructure of global trade, we make ourselves exceedingly vulnerable to disruptions for any number of reasons, from natural disasters, floods, earthquakes, tsunamis, and resource depletion, peak oil, to political violence, war, terrorism, organized crime. Fermentation can be a centerpiece of economic revival. Relocalizing food means a renewal not only of agriculture, but also of the processes used to transform and preserve the products of agriculture into the things that people eat and drink every day, including ferments such as bread, cheese, and beer. By participating in local food production, agriculture, and beyond, we actually create important resources that can help fill our most basic daily needs. By supporting this local food revival, we recycle our dollars into our communities, where they may repeatedly circulate, supporting people in productive endeavors and creating incentives for people to acquire important skills, as well as feeding us fresher, healthier food with less fuel and pollution embedded in it. As our communities feed ourselves more and thereby reclaim power and dignity, we also decrease our collective dependency on the fragile infrastructure of global trade. Cultural revival means economic revival. Everywhere I go, I meet people who are making the choice to be part of this culture of revival. Perhaps this is exemplified best by the growing number of young people who are choosing to take up farming. The second half of the 20th century saw the near extinction of the tradition of regional food self-sufficiency in the United States and many other places. Today, that tradition is in revival. Let us support and become part of it. Productive local food systems are better than globalized food for many reasons. They yield fresher and more nutritious food, local jobs and productivity, less dependence on fuel and infrastructure, and greater food security. We must become more closely connected to the land via our food, and we must have people willing to do the hard physical work of agriculture. Value and reward that work, and get involved with it. I don't want to give the impression that this culture of revival is brand new. There always have been holdouts who resist new technologies, such as farmers who never adopted chemical methods, or never stopped using and saving the legacy of seed resources they inherited, or still use horses in lieu of tractors, or families who have unceasingly maintained fermentation practices. There have always been seekers looking to reconnect to old ways, or unwilling to accept the conveniences of modern culture. As much as culture is always reinventing itself in unprecedented ways, culture is continuity. There are always roots. Cultural revival certainly does not require abandoning cities and suburbs for some remote rural ideal. We must create more harmonious ways of life where people and infrastructures are, and that is mostly cities and suburbs. Sustainability, or resilience, cannot be remote ideals you have to go somewhere else to fully realize. They are ethics we can and must build into our lives however we are able to and wherever we find ourselves. Nearly 20 years ago, I moved from a lifetime in Manhattan to an off-the-grid rural commune in Tennessee, and I'm so glad I did. Sometimes a dramatic change is exactly what you need. I was 30 years old, had recently tested HIV positive, and was searching for a big change I could not yet imagine, when a chance encounter led me to a communal homestead of queers in the woods. I can personally testify that rural resettlement can be a rewarding path. But rural living is certainly not intrinsically better or more sustainable than city life. In fact, rural dwelling, as most of us, myself included, are practicing it, involves driving frequently to get around. In the city I grew up in, most people do not have cars and get around using mass transit. Cities are where most people are, and much incredibly creative and transformative work is being done in urban and suburban areas. Urban farming and homesteading are on the rise, flourishing especially in cities with large expanses of abandoned properties. The revival of artisan fermentation enterprises is centered around cities, mainly because they hold the major markets, no matter where production may occur. The late great urbanist Jane Jacobs put forth an intriguing theory that agriculture developed and spread from cities rather than rural outposts. In her book, The Economy of Cities, Jacobs rejects the prevailing assumption that cities are built upon a rural economic base, which she calls the dogma of agricultural primacy. Instead, she argues that the inherent creativity of urbanism fostered the innovations that spawned, and continually reinvent, agriculture. The first spread of the new grains and animals is from city to city. The cultivation of plants and animals is, as yet, only city work. Her basic idea is that a trading settlement that is a crossroads for people migrating from different areas provides a dynamic environment for incidental seed crossing and selective breeding, as well as greater opportunities for specialization and the development and spread of techniques. If Jacob's theory is correct, then fermentation practices must also have urban roots. Rural dwellers may frequently be guardians of inherited legacies such as seeds, cultures, and know-how. However, it is primarily urbanites who are spurring agricultural change in the countryside by creating demand, starting farmers' markets and providing the bulk of the community support for what is known as community-supported agriculture, CSA. Urbanites can grow gardens and ferment, just as rural dwellers can. They can also tap into the deep currents of creativity that exist in cities, and the inevitable cross-pollination that occurs there to foster change. That change can incorporate ancient wisdom that is in danger of disappearing, just as much as it can foster innovation. In any case, cultural revival is not exclusively or even primarily a rural endeavor. Much of the 20th century literature of fermentation promoted moving production away from small-scale, community-based cottage industry into factories and replacing traditional starter cultures passed down from generation to generation with laboratory-bred improved strains in the name of improved hygiene, safety, nutrition, and efficiency. When an attempt was made to introduce Western-type beverages such as beer, Coca-Cola, and other soft drinks to the Bantu people, they were rejected. Clifford W. Hesseltine and Hua L. Huang of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Fermentation Laboratory reported in 1977. So the Bantu beer process, as practiced in the native villages, was investigated. When the native process was understood and the yeast and bacteria occurring in the process had been isolated, an industrial fermentation process was developed using modern malting and fermentation equipment. The Bantu beer made in these modern fermentation plants was readily accepted. The product, produced under sanitary conditions, is of uniform quality and sells at a low price. A cheap and uniform product, mass-produced under sanitary conditions, is taken as unequivocally superior to the traditional village-produced product, regardless of the cultural and economic importance of the practice in the village context. Meanwhile, Paul Barker from South Africa writes, "Traditional fermentation, along with many other practices, are dying out in our African cultures and need to be recorded before lost to the likes of KFC, Coca-Cola, and Levi's." My objective with this book is to encourage a reclaiming of fermentation in our homes and in our communities, as a means of reclaiming food, and with it a broad web of connections. Rather than fermenting just grapes, barley, and soybeans, let's ferment acorns, turnips, sorghum, or whatever food surpluses we can access or create. The great global monoculture ferments are wonderful indeed, but the practical thrust of localism must be learning to make the most of surpluses that make themselves, such as acorns, or are so well adapted that they practically grow themselves with only a minimum of intervention, such as turnips or radishes in Tennessee gardens. This book is organized around types of ferments and specifically how to make them. The first 3 chapters are broad overviews, contextualizing fermentation in terms of evolution, practical benefits, and basic operational concepts. Most of the rest is organized by substrates, what foods are fermenting, and whether or not the products are primarily alcoholic. The end chapters address considerations for people thinking about turning their passion for fermentation into a commercial enterprise, non-food applications of fermentation, and finally, a cultural revivalist manifesto. In the processes-focused core of the book, I have abandoned the recipe format, aside from a few recipes contributed by others. Rather than specific recipes, I wish to communicate concepts with broad applicability. I offer general proportions or ranges of proportions and process parameters, and sometimes even seasoning suggestions. I have attempted to explain what to do in each ferment and why. Fermentation is more dynamic and variable than cooking, for we are collaborating with other living beings. The hows and whys of these sometimes complex relationships are more important than the specific quantities and combinations of ingredients, which inevitably vary among recipes and traditions. I want to help you understand the hows and whys of fermentation. With that understanding, recipes are everywhere, and you can creatively explore. Chapter 1. Fermentation as a Co-Evolutionary Force. Most of the information you will find in this book
Sample complete. Ready to continue?